All right, folks. Hey, welcome back to the program. There's been a lot of talk recently. I don't know if you've noticed that, everybody's anxious to get Donald Trump out of office or to hand him a loss, if you will. And one of the latest fantasies, if you will, from the Democrats and the left is that the Supreme Court has now agreed to take up whether or not Donald Trump has to release his tax returns. And I wanted to bring in Conduit contributor Hannah Webb Howard back with us. Hannah, how are you this morning?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Paul. It's always good to be on.
Yes. So I'm looking at some headlines, just a few of them right now. We're going to throw up on the screen from CNBC. What Trump's tax returns might reveal if the Supreme Court allows access. Also, we have thehill.com. Will the Supreme Court protect the rule of law or Donald Trump? And then we have this other one, Supreme Court to rule on release of Trump tax records. So, Hannah, what are your thoughts on all this as a law student?
So here's what's really interesting about them taking this case up. Well, so first of all, we remember during the campaign, his tax returns were a huge deal. Everyone wanted him to release his tax returns. Well, if that was going to happen during the campaign, it was just going to be because he wanted to. Just in the interest of transparency, he was going to release his tax returns. Well, he did not, and so now what's happened is there are people wanting to force him to produce his tax returns in investigation. So two totally different dynamics going on than what we heard during the campaign and what we're hearing now.
Yeah.
So the case that the Supreme Court's going to hear are three different cases rolled into one, and they do that a lot. They do that whether it's one person being sued or they do that if it's multiple people with a very similar case. They'll roll it into one and decide it for everyone. So that's what they've done, which these cases are really similar. But there's really two different types of cases that are going on. So I'm going to talk about them almost as if they're two cases, but just remember they're three. And I'm going to talk about them as the people who want his tax returns. So there's three different types of people who want his tax returns. First, a state prosecutor out of New York has sued his accountant for his tax returns.
Okay.
The Ways and Means Committee has sued his accountant also for his tax returns. And the Ways and Means, or not the Ways and Means Committee, the House Financial Services and the Intelligence Committee has sued his bank to get any of his financial statements. So here's why these people want them, which is what gets interesting and crafty. So the state prosecutor out of New York, this is the most interesting case to me because the state prosecutor, ever since Paul Manafort and Cohen has gone down, it's been a feeding frenzy for these people to get Trump for something. Because, these people didn't go down for anything that they were initially investigated for. And so it's been a frenzy to get the Trump organization, anyone in the Trump family, Trump organization, or Trump himself to go down, one misstep in their taxes, one misstep in their business dealings. And so that's exactly what the state prosecutors are doing. So he has he has issued a subpoena to Trump's accountant saying, you've got to give me Trump's tax returns because I want to take them to a grand jury to see if we can bring charges against the Trump organization. And so basically what that means is every single time you're in federal court, and sometimes when you're in state court, before somebody is ever charged with a crime, before they say, okay, you've got to go to trial over battery or you've got to go to trial over tax fraud, they're going to take it to a jury top pool of individuals and say, okay, here's the information we have so far. Do you think it's enough to bring charges against this guy? There's no judge present. It's just the prosecutor and this group of people. And so this prosecutor wants his tax returns put in front of a grand jury to see if there's even enough information there to bring charges against Trump. So it's not a trial. We're not even to that point yet. We're just trying to see if we're going to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Trump is claiming here, why he says you can't get it, is this thing called executive immunity. So there's executive privilege and an executive immunity. And we have heard them a lot through the impeachment process and even before, because the executive privilege keeps those advisors, Trump and his advisors, from having to talk about the really sensitive information that they talk about day to day. So, in the impeachment processes, and any time one of his advisors is called to testify, we hear executive privilege over and over. And then there's this thing called executive immunity, which says, first, the president can't be sued for money while he's in office because of the things he does because he's president. If the president sends a troop to war and he gets killed, that family can't sue Trump for $10,000 for their loss.
Right.
But executive immunity also says a sitting president cannot be indicted for a crime. And so this came up during the Nixon era. That's when we heard executive immunity a lot. And the Clinton era when he was being sued, of course, for all the sexual harassment cases. And so those are just the points in history we've heard this that people would recognize. And so what's different about this case is, first of all, he has not been indicted yet. They're just trying to see if he's been indicted yet. And it's a state prosecutor, not a federal prosecutor. So if executive immunity covers the subpoena, it expands this idea that a sitting president cannot be indicted for crime. So that's what's going on in that first case out of state prosecutor in New York. Really, really interesting. But then when the different committees want his tax returns and his financial information, this is where it gets crafty. And so here is where you're going to make the argument Congress is really just abusing their power just because they can. And so what they're doing, so Congress, of course, they have several roles, and we see their role as in the impeachment process, and we see their role when people have to come and testify in front of them. But primarily their job is to legislate. And so the Constitution limits what they can do, even though it does not seem like that most of the time. The Constitution is supposed to limit what they're going to do, and it limits it in most part to legislating. So they really can't do anything. They can't ask for records. They can't hold hearings unless it's somehow tied to legislation. So they say, they being the committee, that they want Trump's tax returns and financial information just to see if he's done anything wrong.
Right.
And if he has, we're going to pass remedial legislation. So that's like the tie. Well, if we find something, then we'll just pass something to fix it.
Right.
That's
So there's nothing on the books that say you have to disclose your tax returns, obviously,
Absolutely
or
not.
there would have already been something there because they hate the man. So they're just trying to he's used the term presidential harassment. I mean, they're just trying to find something else. It's just kind of like, I don't know the legal concepts like you do, Hannah, but I do know, like, for example, they really, really, really wanted the grand jury testimonies from the Mueller report. Well, you can't have those, and there's a law against that, and yet that's what they want. They just want more stuff to go to the media to try to, get rid of President Donald Trump, and that's what I see this as. But my question to you is, legally, do you see, even if, you've got conservatives on the court, is there a chance that these folks are going to side with the Democrats on this from a legal standpoint?
So, really, really loaded question, Paul.
I know. I know it is.
But, so, it's one of these things that really could go both ways. And, of course, I'm not going to sit here and act like I am some Supreme Court master and know what they're thinking. So, with the committee, the congressional committee, they're using this thing called the necessary and proper clause. And it basically says, so long as Congress has a legitimate end, meaning the end goal is something that's within their congressional power, they can do anything, they can use any means necessary to achieve that end. So that gives them a phenomenal amount of power. And it's been a huge power grab for them for centuries. For as long as we've been a country, it's been a huge power grab for them. And that, the necessary and proper clause, is how they get to do a lot of what they get to do now. So it's not totally bizarre for them to think that they're going to expand, using the necessary and proper clause, expand this kind of idea. It's a weird fit, but the law is always a weird fit for that to happen. So that's because I read up on the when you submit your case to the Supreme Court, you ask them to grant Centauri. And so I read their petition for Centauri, and that is what the Trump administration.
So tell us what that is. I don't know what that is. Centauri sounds like some sort of Greek mythology character.
So this is really fun to talk about, because these are all these things that I didn't understand before law school, and now I'm just like, wow, I can't believe I spent my whole life not knowing these things. So it's really interesting. Every case that you start at the very bottom, you appeal your case, well, and then you appeal to the Supreme Court. Well, the Supreme Court does not have to hear your case. You don't have a right for the Supreme Court to hear your case. You have a right to appeal your case to that first appellate court, but you don't have a right to appeal it to the Supreme Court. And not every case that gets appealed to the Supreme Court gets heard. There's only certain kinds of cases that are heard. And so this type of case involving a president, it's absolutely more than likely going to go to the Supreme Court, just because the importance and the weight and the precedent that it sets. So this is a little bit of a different situation. But just as regular folks out here, let's say, Paul, me and you sue somebody, and we appeal to the appellate court and we lose, so we want to go to the Supreme Court. Well, we don't automatically get to go. What the Supreme Court does is they kind of look out over the country, and they find these issues that have been common all throughout the country, and they see if the courts are agreeing on it. So, let's say I sue you over some radio issue.
Right.
And there's all these cases going on in New York and California and Florida, all about the same radio issue. Well, if all those courts are agreeing, they're going to be like, okay, they're doing a good job, we'll just let them agree. But let's say Arkansas decides it one way, and then New York decides it a different way, and then Florida decides it a different way. Well, then that's what they're going to call a circuit split, and the courts aren't agreeing. And so a case like that is what the Supreme Court kind of looks for, to say, okay, y'all are coming up with different outcomes. We're going to hear it and decide this once for all. And so when you want the court to hear your case, you petition for Centauri, which basically just says, okay, Supreme Court, here is the case that I want you to take up, and here's the question that I want you to answer. And then they will either grant Centauri or deny it, which just means, okay, we'll hear your case, or sorry.
Yeah. Well.
And so it's a huge briefing process. So, everything, believe it or not, and this is also something I did not realize before I came to law school, and I learned it the very hard way. Lawyers write a lot. Every single step of the process is just writing and papers. And so a petition for Centauri is no different. And so it's this huge legal document. Basically, you're arguing your position before you even know if the case is going to be heard.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, and that's what I read yesterday. And the Trump issue was, well, they're going to use the necessary and proper clause, or that's what they're using to try and get my tax returns. And they're saying, this is completely the Trump administration is arguing this is just beyond their power. This is beyond even that.
So you would you agree, though, that however it goes down, the Supreme Court rules for Trump, the Supreme Court rules for the state of New York or the Democrats in the Congress, is it an increase in power both ways? Is it an increase in power in the executive if he wins, and an increase in power in the legislative in the states if they win?
So I don't know that it's necessarily an increase in power for the executive. I think it's just going to stay the same.
I got you.
The issue with the executive immunity, it would expand that a little bit, but it wouldn't necessarily extend his power. It would just extend the fact that, okay, you can't be tried in state courts just like you can't be tried in federal courts. So it doesn't change it too much.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really expand his power.
Well, and I don't even know when we've ever been in that situation. I mean, when maybe there is a situation where a state court has tried to sue a sitting president, but you would assume federal authority has grown so much that that's just not a thing that's going to be allowed to happen.
Right. So it's just always kind of been a general understanding, you can't charge the president with a crime. And so I honestly, and I may be very wrong about this, but I got the impression that this is the first time it's ever happened in the state court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's going to be an interesting grab of power from the other side of the equation from Trump.
Yeah.
So it's going to be it's a really interesting case to follow and see see what happens from it.
Well, and
so.
it's got 2020 electoral political implications because we're probably going to find out something, sometime next year, and
Yes.
we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Really,
They go to oral arguments March 2020, which means that we should probably have a decision that summer.
All right. Hannah Webb Howard, Conduit contributor. We always appreciate your analysis. Thanks so much for spending time with us this morning. Have a Merry Christmas.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. You too.
All righty, folks, back in a minute.